Hello there, this is the deck profile of the deck I built and used to win the Edison World Championship Qualifier 8. As you can see, this is a Frog Monarch deck. This is more of a stun version I built. In fact, as we can see, I ran 3 copies of Light and Darkest Dragon. This is good because you can actually summon it in all the phases of the game. In earlier turns, it can drain your opponent's cards or even life points. In mid games, it's difficult to remove, and in the late game, it's almost always game, because if your opponent has something like 1 of 2 cards and this it's a field, it's really difficult to get rid of it. Then we have, of course, triple Caius and triple Ryza. These are pretty standard, of course. One Testalos is odd, but use it because it's good against many decks like Black Wings and Fairy Lights, or that kind of deck with a lot of cards in their hand. Also Mirror Match, but in matchup like Vayu, it can actually discard cards useful for the opponent, maybe like Sirocco and Vayu, which it's not good for Light and Darkness, for example. So one was, balanced to me. Of course, we have many frogs, and I always like to play 3 dupe frog in classical Frog Monarch deck, because usually the first dupe is used to get to, I don't know, Swap Frog or whatever, and then the other 2 gives you the actual lock. Of course, sometimes you want to, for example, not to summon 1 dupe frog with a substitute for a Unifrog, and that's great, but still in many situations, if, for example, one dupe was already used and I run only 2 of them, it's really bad to pass with substi and dupe, because that's really so much easier to break this soft lock. So I really prefer the double dupe, triple dupe in the deck, so I can safely do a double dupe lock, especially because I don't run the usual discard traps like a Reggae Break, except in the side deck, but not in a main deck. So I think that's really solid. After that, I have this particular card. This is a stun card, because it can negate my opponent's effect, the monster effect, and also it's not that easy to destroy by battle. Of course, it's also a water monster, so Swap Frog can easily trade it for a Monarch on the field or a Light and Darkness, so it can actually be used in other ways. Of course, it can be tributed for Roy, but that's not the best and doesn't happen so often, so I'm quite good with it. Then we have Gorz, of course, which is a really powerful card in this deck, because it's really the limited card, the limited monster, the equivalent of that in other decks, because for example, it can be combined with Light and Darkest Dragon, so that, for example, there is Treeborn and the token are tributed for Light and Darkness, so there is a really strong Gorz which can be, which is difficult to counter, because, for example, 1 prison is not enough, and if there is a chainable prison with I don't know, another card, it can be done either on Gorz or on Light and Darkness, but not on all of them. and if a mirror force is chained to destroy, for example, Light and Darkness, Gorse is destroyed too, and someone can be summoned again. So it's really powerful in this deck. And it's, it allows to make, for example, all the damage in one turn in a few situations, but it's the only situation where this deck can actually win in one turn. So it's really powerful. Triple Father is necessary in this deck. I don't really like the version with discard traps instead of Fader, unless there is something too good to discard, like Dandelion, Malicious or whatever, because it is really solid as a defense battle Fader, and of course it helps to summon, for example, Light and Darkness Dragon, so it's really good. Of course, EV Store, and then instead of MST, which is in the side deck, I played My Body as a Shield, because it's really better in most situations. For example, one of the easiest way for the opponent to counter the lock is a Torrential Tribute, but is negated. Also, Icarus Attack, Mirror Force, Bottomless, potentially Black Rose Dragon or Judgment Dragon. Of course, so it's really better in many more situations, especially because cards like Legacy of Villa Tagarazo are much more played now, and with MST I would randomly activate it on potentially that card, and that would be a terrible -1. In this case it isn't, and Triple Battle Father helps me to keep my life points so that I can activate this card as well, so it's really synergic. Of course, we have the 7 cards to use the opponent monsters. That's necessarily not just for Light and Darkness Dragon, which requires 2 tributes, but for other reasons. For example, after side, I always want to have 3 Sodex. So for cards like, for example, Vanity, and also decks like Frog Monarch, Hero Frog, for example, puts 1 of 2 of these cards in their side deck, but here is 3 in the main. It's really incredible. I have many more tributes, and also the Substi. Enemy Controller is also a really incredible card, because it is like Brain Control, which is a broken card of the format, but this can be actually free because of Tribune in standby, but also during battle phase and in many more situations. It's really an excellent card. Against a side which is aggressive to the grave, for example, with many Decrows, Soul Release, Kaikon, whatever. Maybe 1, maybe 2 copy less can be arranged, but essentially is always to keep all 3 or at least 2, because it's really really powerful. And finally, Aoi. This is a really powerful card, but also difficult to play, because sometimes you want to use it at once, as you see it, but some other times you have to wait for the right moment, because you might be too much exposed to your opponent's move. If you just go for this, maybe you need to Solex with a Monarch, for example, but in some situation you can, for example, Enemy Controller an opponent's deck by tributing Tribune, then you tribute your opponent monster, so you stay with a Tribune alongside a Monarch, then you set Aoi, and when you pass you have your Monarch on the field, and you have full control over your opponent hand, and sometimes that's enough to win the game, for example. Let's see the side deck. Here the stun strategy is brought even to a stronger level, for example, because we have 3 Vanity Fiend. These are great in many matchups. The most important is Vaio Turbo, but of course in all the mirror matches, of course. That is game changer card, of course. Usually I use it with Kaiku, because these 2 Kaiku can banish cards to Vaio Turbo, for example, but also prevents the opponent from banishing, so all the Vaio and the Vaio cannot activate the effect. It's really difficult to get rid of it, especially in combination with Light and Darkness Dragon, because the effect of Vaio cannot be activated while there is Kaiku. So it's really difficult then to get rid of Light and Darkness Dragon, and they together deal a lot of damage, so it's really a powerful card. Then we have Cyber Dragon, which are good against every machine deck, of course, but also they are kind of good in other matchup, like Blackwing, for example, even Vaio Turbo, because when, for example, they are aggressive with the graveyard, and so it's difficult to summon the tribute. We have Soul Exchange, which of course they stay in the side deck, they stay in the deck even after the side, but also we have these 2 copies, which can make it faster, for example, to deal damages or just to summon monsters. So it can be good, for example, Sidra plus Kaiku to deal damage and banish card to the opponents from the opponent's grave. Or, for example, sometimes Sidra Vanity, and it's enough to deal a lot of damage for many turns and maybe even won the game, because for example, one very good thing of Vanity is that pulling the rug is not effective against it, as well as the virus. So in game 2 and 3 there are many key cards, for example against the Grave or the Frogs, but useless against Vanity, and with Sidra we can actually achieve to summon Vanity quickly. So this is the core of the monster strategy after side, of course. Then we have the MST, because sometimes it's easier, against for example Blackwing, we won both My Body's a Shield and MST for Black Whirlwind, but still it's a really good card, of course. Super Poly is of course for Hero Frog, because in the side we have, in the extra deck, we have Absolute Zero, which is the #1 choice, but also D3S Frog, because the first effect of Dupe Frog is that this card names becomes Death Frog while on the field. So if the opponent has locked with let's say 2 Dupe Frogs and we summon just one, with Super Poly we can summon this monster, which is not that bad actually. And of course we have the 2 Chimera deck, because we have to Sidra, of course. By the way, in this tournament I have never used the extra deck, because there was no chance to do that, of course. Also I have a large part of the side made of trap cards, because especially when the opponent uses the virus, cards like Battle Father becomes less useful. So if they are replaced by trap cards, they can actually be used. Of course, we have the Reggae Break, which are very versatile. to get rid of monster or spell and trap cards of the opponent in many situations. Of course, I've tried, for example, Dust Tornado, stuff like that, but it's always a problem. For example, to use, to know exactly when to set it. Okay. This is not the same for Trap Stun. Actually, what I would change of this deck is of this side deck is to find some room for at least one more Trap Stun, because this is really a key card, because you can negate literally everything of your opponent. Spell and trap cards, they can have 3, 4, whatever. There is some not so good chances, but it can happen to use Trap Stun and then EV Storm and throw everything into the grave. For example, the opponent might have Solemn Judgment or Starlight Road and all to the grave. It didn't happen in this tournament, but in other it happened, so it's really good when in those scenarios. But also it can be chained. So for example, if I have a Vanity Fiend, I attack, then I set this one, my opponent set everything, they have to destroy it, like maybe they hold up Prison, Mirror, whatever. Then I attack, I chain this one and it's negated, they need another out. So it's really powerful in many scenarios, many situations, of course. And it's also good with continuous trap cards. In fact, we can see in the image Royal Oppression. It's good against that, because sometimes Oppression is a card which Vaiturba and Blackwing sides against us. But in that case, with Trap Stun, we can, for example, make the whole substitute combo, and when we pass, that oppression will be against the opponent. So it's really good. This one card is incredible. It's incredible because it's even more stun as a strategy, because it doesn't just remove from the graveyard the cards, but its way of removing those cards is by shuffling them back in the deck. This means that Vayu and Sirocco, for example, will be shuffled back in the deck. So Light and Darkness won't have any disruption of the strategy. This happened in the final, for example, and it was really great. But also versus, for example, Pot of Avarice or many other cards, it can be really useful. I wouldn't use it against Frog Monarch, because I would, you can shuffle back Triple Frog, of course, but then Swap Frog can send it back, so it's not of that use. Maybe versus Zero Frog it's better, because you can actually negate a Miracle Fusion, but still I would prefer a Kaiku with, for example, an enemy controller, which can make, for example, an attack on a Tribon Frog and banish the heroes from the grave. Not the same Tribon that is attacking, but still that would be a better solution. Of course, then Mirror and Torrential, because they help you to keep the pace of the game in many circumstances, especially if your opponent knows that you run these cards, like in this tournament where the replay were known by the opponent. So every time after round, I don't know, 3, 4 or whatever, when the list is almost your opponent knows most part of the deck and the strategies, they have to play around these two cards. Even if you maybe set a Trap Stun, they might think it's a Torrential and Mirror Force, and that for example, that can stop Blackwing from swarming the monster, by Turbo from doing the same, and whatever. So it's really essential to me. So this was the deck. The score of the tournament was 10-2. I passed as 13th out of 16 with a score of 6-2. In the whole tournament, I won 10 out of 12 game 1. So I think that the main deck is really good. I wouldn't change it with other cards because, for example, many Frog Monarch players likes to use Junk Synchron, which is a really good card, but I feel that I have to side it out all the times because of the virus mainly, but also oppression, pulling the rug. I don't feel quite good with that card, knowing that I have to swap it always for something else, maybe like Kaiku, which is really great, especially because the one thing I always hear about Junk Synchron is that after side it helps you get rid of Dyna. Okay, that's true, but it does nothing more than that in that scenario, because after you kill Dyna by battle, you are left with that 1300 monster, and your opponent can special summon anything, so even just a Shura with effect and whatever. So it's really poor to me, that kind of strategy. I'd rather use this one instead, or versus deck like Turbo, Kaiko for example. So I don't like that strategy. I always prefer something like that, like this, especially because I have good changes to do from main to side, and I know, and not cards that I know that I will set out every time. So let's see. Okay, I will say briefly the matchup that I encountered during the tournament. By the way, in the description you will find the links to the replays, so you can watch them. So it was 4 Vio Turbo, then 3 Blackwings, 2 Frog Monarch, 1 Diva Hero with polymerization, it's that new version which came out, 1 Crystal Worm, and 1 Fairy deck. Okay, that was 12. I hope you enjoyed this deck profile, and thank you for watching.